Friends, have you ever witnessed something so extraordinary that it completely rewrites the rules of the game? Well, that's exactly what we're seeing unfold right now with Donald Trump's legal situation. This isn't just another political story or another courtroom drama. This is a moment that's literally redefining how justice works in America, and the implications are absolutely staggering. What I'm about to reveal to you goes far beyond what you've been hearing in the mainstream media. We're talking about a series of legal maneuvers and constitutional questions that have never been tested in American history. Never before has our country faced a situation where a convicted felon wins the presidency while simultaneously juggling multiple criminal cases across different states. The Founding Fathers could never have imagined this scenario, and frankly, neither could we. But here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. The moment Trump secured his electoral victory, everything changed overnight. Cases that seemed destined for trial suddenly ground to a halt. Federal prosecutors who had spent years building their arguments began withdrawing charges. Special counsels resigned. It's like watching dominoes fall in reverse, and the speed of it all is breathtaking. Now, before we dive deep into this legal maze, let me give you some context that will help you understand just how unprecedented this situation really is. We are not just talking about one or two legal issues here. Trump has been facing criminal charges in 4 separate cases, civil lawsuits worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and constitutional questions that could reshape presidential power forever. Each of these cases represents a different facet of American law, from state criminal prosecution to federal election interference to civil fraud allegations. What makes this even more remarkable is the timing. Throughout the entire 2024 election campaign, Trump was simultaneously fighting these legal battles while running for the highest office in the land. He was appearing in courtrooms, dealing with depositions, managing legal teams, and campaigning for president all at the same time. The sheer logistics of it all are mind-boggling. But here's where it gets really interesting. The American people knew all of this when they went to the polls in November. They knew about the criminal conviction. They knew about the pending cases. They knew about the civil judgments. And 49% of them still chose to send Trump back to the White House. That electoral decision has now become the most powerful legal shield imaginable. Let me walk you through exactly what happened in the days and weeks following the election, because the speed and scope of these changes will shock you. Federal cases that had been moving through the courts for months suddenly hit the brakes. The Department of Justice, citing long-standing policy that sitting presidents cannot be prosecuted, began the process of winding down federal prosecutions. Special counsel Jack Smith, who had spent 2 years building cases against Trump, announced his resignation and began dismantling his investigations. This isn't just about legal technicalities or procedural delays. We're witnessing the collision of 2 fundamental American principles. On one side, you have the rule of law and the principle that no one is above justice. On the other side, you have democratic governance and the will of the people as expressed through elections. When these 2 forces meet, which one prevails? The answer to that question is reshaping American jurisprudence as we speak. The most dramatic example of this collision happened just recently with Trump's sentencing in the New York hush money case. This was historic territory. Never before had a former president been criminally convicted, let alone sentenced. The judge faced an impossible balancing act. How do you sentence someone who has been found guilty by a jury of his peers while simultaneously respecting the fact that voters have chosen him to lead the nation? The solution was something called an unconditional discharge. Trump gets a criminal record, but no jail time, no probation, no fines, no community service. It's the legal equivalent of saying, "You're guilty, but we're not going to punish you." The judge explicitly stated that this was the only sentence that wouldn't interfere with Trump's ability to govern as president. Think about the precedent this sets. Think about what this means for future cases involving high-ranking political figures. We've essentially created a new category of justice, where electoral success can shield someone from the traditional consequences of criminal conviction. Whether you support Trump or not, you have to acknowledge that this fundamentally changes how our justice system operates. But the New York case is just the tip of the iceberg. The federal cases present even more complex constitutional questions. Special counsel Jack Smith had built what many legal experts considered to be strong cases around election interference and classified documents. These weren't frivolous charges. These were serious allegations backed by extensive evidence and grand jury indictments. Yet, within weeks of the election, both cases were essentially dead in the water. The election interference case, which dealt with Trump's alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election results, raised fundamental questions about the peaceful transfer of power in America. The classified documents case involved national security concerns and the proper handling of government secrets. Both cases simply evaporated once Trump's electoral victory became clear. The speed of this transformation tells us something important about how our system really works. All the legal theories, all the constitutional arguments, all the procedural safeguards ultimately bend to political reality. When the American people make their choice at the ballot box, that choice carries more weight than any indictment or any prosecutor's case. This brings us to one of the most significant developments in this entire saga, and it's something that will have implications far beyond Trump's presidency. The Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity has fundamentally altered the landscape of executive accountability. The court ruled that presidents have substantial immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts performed while in office. This wasn't just a technical legal ruling. This was a redrawing of the boundaries between executive power and criminal justice. The court essentially said that there are certain actions a president can take that are beyond the reach of criminal prosecution, even after they leave office. The exact boundaries of this immunity are still being tested and interpreted, but the basic principle has been established. What makes this particularly relevant to Trump's situation is that many of the actions he's accused of took place while he was president. The Supreme Court's immunity ruling provides a powerful shield against prosecution for those actions, and that shield extends beyond his current presidency into any future legal proceedings. Meanwhile, at the state level, we're seeing a different dynamic play out. State prosecutors aren't bound by the same Department of Justice policies that protect sitting presidents from federal prosecution. In theory, state cases could continue even while Trump serves as president. But in practice, these cases face their own set of constitutional challenges and practical obstacles. The Georgia case, which involves allegations of election interference at the state level, represents the most comprehensive challenge Trump still faces. It's built around racketeering charges that could carry substantial penalties. However, this case has been complicated by procedural issues and allegations of prosecutorial misconduct that have slowed its progress significantly. What we're witnessing is nothing less than a stress test of American democracy and the rule of law. Every assumption we've held about how justice works in this country is being challenged and redefined. The outcomes of these legal battles will establish precedents that will influence American jurisprudence for generations to come. The implications extend far beyond Trump himself, because what we're really watching is the creation of a new framework for how political power intersects with legal accountability in America. This framework will outlast any individual presidency and will shape how future leaders navigate the complex relationship between democratic governance and criminal justice. Consider the broader questions this raises about American democracy. If electoral success can effectively nullify criminal prosecutions, What does that mean for the principle of equal justice under law? If voters can essentially override the decisions of prosecutors and grand juries through their ballot choices, have we fundamentally altered the balance of power in our constitutional system? These aren't abstract philosophical questions anymore. They're practical realities that are being worked out in real time through Trump's legal saga. The timing of all these developments reveals something crucial about how our system actually functions versus how we thought it functioned. For decades, legal scholars and constitutional experts operated under certain assumptions about the relationship between criminal law and executive power. Those assumptions have now been put to the ultimate test, and the results are forcing everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew about American jurisprudence. What's particularly striking is how quickly the entire landscape shifted once the election results became clear. Federal prosecutors who had spent years building cases suddenly found themselves in an impossible position. They couldn't simply ignore Department of Justice policies about prosecuting sitting presidents, but they also couldn't pretend that their cases hadn't been fundamentally altered by the electoral outcome. The resignation of Special Counsel Jack Smith represents more than just the end of specific prosecutions. It represents the collision between prosecutorial independence and political reality. Smith was appointed specifically to provide independence from political considerations, yet ultimately, political developments made his investigations moot. This raises profound questions about whether true prosecutorial independence is even possible when dealing with figures of Trump's political stature. The classified documents case illustrates another dimension of this complexity. Judge Aileen Cannon's decision to dismiss the case based on questions about the special counsel's appointment created significant legal controversy. Her ruling went against decades of precedent regarding special counsel appointments, yet it effectively ended federal prosecution on the documents matter. Whether her decision was legally sound or politically motivated remains a subject of intense debate, but its practical effect was to eliminate one of the most serious charges Trump faced. This case also highlights how individual judges can shape major political outcomes through their legal interpretations. Judge Cannon was appointed by Trump himself, which added another layer of complexity to an already unprecedented situation. The fact that a Trump-appointed judge made decisions that benefited Trump in his criminal case illustrates how deeply intertwined our legal and political systems have become. The civil cases present yet another fascinating dimension to this story. Unlike criminal prosecutions, civil litigation can continue regardless of someone's political status. Trump still faces hundreds of millions of dollars in potential liability from various civil cases, including the E. Jean Carroll defamation judgment and the New York Attorney General's fraud case. These cases operate under different rules and different timelines than criminal prosecutions. What makes the civil cases particularly interesting is that they can't be dismissed through the same mechanisms that have neutralized the criminal cases. There's no Department of Justice policy protecting sitting presidents from civil liability. There's no constitutional immunity for civil matters in the same way there is for certain criminal charges. These cases will likely continue throughout Trump's presidency, creating an ongoing legal backdrop to his time in office. The financial implications alone are staggering. We're talking about judgments and potential settlements that could reach into the hundreds of millions of dollars. How does a sitting president manage such massive civil liability while also performing the duties of the presidency? How do courts handle enforcement actions against someone who occupies the nation's highest office? These are uncharted waters with no clear legal precedents to guide the way forward. The state criminal cases, particularly the Georgia election interference case, represent perhaps the most complex constitutional questions of all. State prosecutors aren't bound by federal policies about prosecuting sitting presidents, but they face practical challenges that are just as daunting. How do you conduct a criminal trial involving a sitting president? How do you handle scheduling conflicts between state court proceedings and presidential duties? How do you manage the security implications of requiring a president to appear in state court? These practical challenges are compounded by the Supreme Court's immunity ruling, which provides some protection for official presidential acts even in state prosecutions. The boundaries of this immunity are still being tested, and the Georgia case could become a crucial testing ground for how far presidential immunity extends in state criminal matters. The Georgia case also involves racketeering charges, which carry their own unique legal implications. RICO prosecutions are designed to address complex criminal enterprises, and they often involve multiple defendants and extensive evidence. The logistical challenges of conducting such a prosecution while one of the defendants serves as president are almost impossible to imagine. What we're seeing unfold is essentially a real-time constitutional convention happening through the court system. Each legal decision, each procedural ruling, each strategic choice by prosecutors and defense attorneys is helping to define how American democracy will function in the future. The precedents being established now will influence legal and political decisions for decades to come. The speed at which this transformation has occurred is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire story. Just months ago, Trump was facing the very real possibility of criminal trials, potential prison sentences, and massive civil judgments that could have effectively ended his political career. Today, he's preparing to return to the presidency with most of his legal troubles either resolved or indefinitely delayed. This rapid transformation demonstrates something important about the relationship between political power and legal accountability in America. While our system is designed with checks and balances, ultimate political power still rests with the voters. When the American people make their choice, that choice can override prosecutorial decisions, judicial rulings, and legal precedents in ways that few people fully anticipated. What makes this story even more fascinating is how it reveals the hidden power structures that really govern America. Behind all the legal procedures and constitutional theories, we're seeing raw political dynamics that most Americans never fully understood until now. The relationship between electoral success and legal immunity isn't written in any textbook, but it's proving to be one of the most powerful forces in our entire system. Think about what this means for future political leaders. Any ambitious politician now knows that electoral victory provides the ultimate legal shield. Win enough votes, and you can effectively neutralize criminal prosecutions, maintain political support, and you can weather legal storms that would destroy ordinary citizens. This isn't necessarily good or bad, but it's a fundamental shift in how power operates in America. The timing of Trump's legal victories also reveals something crucial about how our institutions really function under pressure. When push comes to shove, when constitutional principles collide with political reality, the system finds ways to resolve the tension that most people never anticipated. Federal prosecutors don't just give up because they feel like it. Special counsels don't resign because they're tired. These are institutional responses to forces that operate beyond normal legal procedures. But here's what's really going to blow your mind about this entire situation. We're not just watching the resolution of Trump's legal troubles. We're watching the creation of a new template for how powerful political figures can navigate criminal accountability in the future. Every strategy that worked for Trump, every legal argument that succeeded, every procedural delay that proved effective is now part of a playbook that other politicians will study and potentially use. The Supreme Court's immunity ruling alone has created a framework that will influence presidential behavior for generations. Future presidents now know they have substantial protection for official acts, even controversial ones. They know that certain actions taken while in office may be beyond the reach of criminal prosecution, even after they leave the presidency. This knowledge will inevitably influence how presidents make decisions and how they view the constraints on their power. Consider the international implications of what we're witnessing. Foreign leaders and international observers are watching how America handles this unprecedented situation. They're seeing how democratic institutions respond when electoral politics collides with criminal justice. The precedents being established here will influence how other democracies handle similar situations in the future. The message being sent to the world is complex and potentially contradictory. On one hand, America is demonstrating that even the most powerful political figures can face criminal charges and civil liability. The fact that Trump was actually convicted and sentenced shows that the system can hold leaders accountable. On the other hand, the minimal consequences and the effective dismissal of federal cases suggests that political success can ultimately overcome legal accountability. This contradiction reflects something deeper about American democracy that many people are only now beginning to understand. Our system was designed with competing principles that don't always work together smoothly. The rule of law demands equal treatment regardless of political status. Democratic governance demands respect for electoral outcomes. When these principles conflict, the resolution isn't predetermined by constitutional text or legal precedent. What we're seeing is that political reality ultimately trumps legal theory when the stakes are high enough. This isn't necessarily a failure of the system, but it does reveal how the system actually works versus how most people thought it worked. The textbook version of American government emphasizes checks and balances and the rule of law. The real-world version shows that electoral politics can override almost any other consideration when the pressure is intense enough. The financial dimensions of this story also reveal important truths about power and accountability in America. Trump still faces massive civil liability, but the practical challenges of collecting hundreds of millions of dollars from a sitting president illustrate how political status can complicate even civil enforcement. Courts may have the legal authority to enforce judgments, but the practical realities of dealing with a president create complications that most legal procedures weren't designed to handle. So, there you have it, folks. We've just witnessed the most extraordinary collision between justice and politics in American history. From federal cases vanishing overnight, to historic sentencings that carry no punishment, from Supreme Court immunity rulings to the complete transformation of how our legal system operates when electoral success meets criminal accountability. This isn't just Trump's story anymore. This is the story of how American democracy really works when pushed to its absolute limits. The precedents being set right now will echo through our political system for decades to come, and we're all just witnessing history being written in real time. What happens next will determine whether this becomes the new normal or remains a once-in-a-lifetime exception to how justice operates in America.